Okay, we'll continue, and then we will continue on our journey, and then if perhaps at the end we'll open up for questions. Those who want to stay for the questions can do so. So now we discussed the concept of talking. Now we will. Oh, it looks like we're having some questions here. Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to read the texts, the chats. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. So we'll continue, and we'll get back to the questions as we said. Okay, let's continue down our journey. So we discussed the concept of speech, which is one of the primary mitzvot of the night. Now we'll talk a little bit about matzah. Now, any seder you'll go to, any essay you'll read about Passover, we'll talk about matzah. Any Kabbalistic meditation of Passover, we'll talk about matzah. And we discussed matzah many times before. We discussed matzah last week. Now I want to give a new element of matzah, a new angle that probably is not as famous, but is important and certainly important for the era that we're living in today. So let's think about matzah for a moment. Matzah is the bread that, on one hand, we call it the bread of poverty because all it has is flour and water, so there's no taste. If you take a nice piece of challah or a Danish, you have oil, you have sugar, you have eggs. Some people put in cinnamon. My children put in, I don't know how they got this, but they put in, what do they call those? They call those sprinkles. They put the sprinkles in their challah. And they didn't have that in the old country, but that's what they're doing today. So bread is the idea of eating bread is the idea of sort of intensifying the pleasure of the experience. If you can't afford any ingredients, you just have the basics, you just have the bare necessities, then your flour and water. And that's why we eat flour, we eat the matzah, and at the beginning of the Seder, when we start telling the story, we say, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate when they were in Egypt, and we call it lechem oini. The Talmud says we call it bread of poverty. There's two meanings of oini. It can mean bread of speech, la'anot, to answer, to respond, but it can also mean bread of poverty. So in one sense, the matzah is a bread of poverty. On the other hand, matzah is the symbol of freedom, because that's the bread we carried on our back when we left Egypt. And one of the reasons why we eat matzah is because the bread did not have time to rise. We were rushed, so we ran out of Egypt, and there was no time for the bread to rise, and that's why we're stuck with matzah. Some people would say, unfortunately, if the Jews only were able to go out of Egypt with some knishes or with some danishes, then we would be eating danishes for 7 days. Life would be good. But unfortunately or fortunately, they left with the matzah, and we're stuck with matzah for 8 days. So let's think of 7 days out in Israel, 8 days out of Israel. So let's think about this for a moment. There's a certain paradox of matzah. It's a little bit counterintuitive. I would expect that freedom, if we're eating a bread that would represent freedom, there would be freedom is about pleasure. Freedom is about taste. Freedom is about much more than just the bare necessities. That's what one would expect. And yet what's happening here is we're saying bread of freedom is a bread that has nothing but the necessities, just the flour and just the water, and that is freedom. So how exactly does that work? So there is a fascinating commentary by the Maharal of Prague, and the Maharal was a 17th century sage in the city of Prague, and he was very prolific and very Kabbalistic, and he offers the following meditation. He says as follows, he says, if I have many possessions and I have many opportunities and I have a lot going on in my life, a lot of pleasure, a lot of things to do and places to go, that is very tasty. It actually is pleasurable. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I am free. Because freedom, as we'll define it, freedom is the ability to get in touch with self and how I am not dependent on anything else. And he says, if I am dependent on having sugar in my bread, if I'm dependent on having eggs in my bread, if I'm dependent on having oil in my bread, of course, this is all metaphors. The metaphor is if I am dependent on worldly material things to give me pleasure, and if I don't have it, I have a bad day, then in that sense, I am not free. So the Maharal says, if you want to experience freedom on Passover, freedom on any day, but on Passover is the way we experience freedom. If you want to experience freedom, you have to ask yourself, what is my core? What is my flour on water? What is really me? Not what I do for pleasure, but what is my essence? And if I can get in touch with that and spend time on that and develop that, then I am essentially free. And this is a interesting commentary. I don't say it every year, but I think this year it's probably more relevant than ever because everybody has this idea of what Passover means. I have to go to other people have to come to here, the children get together, there's a lot of fun and excitement. Here, it's sort of stripping down Passover to its essence. And that's really a metaphor for what's going on in the society as a whole. Because all day long, I am pretty much busy. I'm running, I'm coming, I'm going, I'm distracting myself with things I have to do, with errands, with things that are secondary to what the essence of my life is. Now, today, because of the circumstances, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing to do. I mean, I have less to do. So I can't do what I typically do. I can't go to the gym. I can't look for leisure. I can't look for pleasure. I have much less of that in my life. So now I have the opportunity to ask myself, no more pleasurable ingredients. What is my flour? What is my water? What is my core? What is my essence? What is life really meaningful for me? What is life about for me? What are the things that don't change? See, what I do changes. Yesterday I went to the gym, today I can't. That's what I do. But what about who I am? What about what's really meaningful to me? The spiritual side of self. That is the matzah. That's the flour on water, which is counterintuitive. You think that flour on water would represent poverty. But in truth, flour on water represents the person who is free. He doesn't need things on the outside to give meaning to his life, because that person can find meaning from within. If you can do this, if you can find the meaning from within, you are a free person and you are eating matzah and you are internalizing the Kabbalistic experience of Passover. So that's the second meditation that we have about matzah. The second meditation for now about matzah, which is the concept of matzah as the bread of poverty, the concept of matzah as the bread that is just the essence of what a person needs. And if you get in touch, if you realize I don't need anything, the more things I need, the more dependent I am on things outside myself, outside my essence, the less free I am. The more I find meaning and I find a value within myself, the more free I am. So that's a meditation about matzah. And in a moment, we will offer another one.